Mm-hmm.
Okay. Hello, and welcome to this online version of the Splunk User Group for Edinburgh. Um, we wanted to do this in person, but I couldn't plan an in-person one for the life of me, so we're stuck online today.
Not a bad thing.
Yeah, just unmuted you two as well, Tom, so you can now speak.
That helps. Hi, everyone.
Yeah. So today we're going to cover two things. So what I'm going to talk about is very impromptu because Splunk 9.1 was just released yesterday. And then Tom is going to speak about his upcoming conf talk because conf is how many weeks away? Is it 3 weeks away?
It's about that, yeah.
Yeah.
I travel
And
2 weeks this Saturday, but it's about 3 weeks.
and you're gonna do a present. You're gonna present there as speakers, so you're gonna give everyone here a sneak peek of your content.
Yeah, I mean, sneak peek. You're gonna get the full stuff, but yeah, it's a sneak peek. Luckily, no embargoes, so yes, I am able to talk about it and show it off. So
Yeah. And because we're doing this on YouTube Live, it's a bit hard to work out if people can actually hear us or not. So feel free to put stuff in the chat. So I'm going to be watching the chat as we go along. If you have any questions, I will relay it to Tom as well. So if anyone can put like a thumbs up if you can hear us, all right.
that's the first test.
Yeah. And the stream's delayed by about 10 seconds or so, so it's going to be a while before I can confirm that. But anyway, can we move to the next slide just for the general introductions again? So I'm Andrew. If you've seen any of these for the last couple of years, I've been the co-leader of the group, currently working out at Lloyd's Banking Group. And then we also have Tom, who is the other co-leader of the group.
Yep, yep, that's me. Engineering lead at Adama. Yeah. And then this is me in a different context. Speaking with my sword, one of the many swords I own now.
So
So, sorry,
go on.
Adama sponsor this. Obviously, I work for Adama, the largest Splunk delivery partner for the UK. We provide consultancy and managed service provider, and as you can see, we've won a few awards with Splunk over the years. This is going to be recorded, or as you see, made available publicly on YouTube. So if you do want to discuss topics or mention something in the chat, try to not mention anything confidential or anything you don't want to be made public. Obviously, with the chat not being on the screen, still don't do it. But yeah, just be aware of that. And also being specific about clients that you work with. Again, happy to talk about things you've done, just don't necessarily add the customer context in so that people can't understand who it was, unless of course you're happy for it to be made public. The overall goal is so the house rules, they're just technical discussions. There's no sales chats here. We're not trying to push Splunk on people. We are just trying to talk technically about the tool. It's an inclusive environment, so there are no silly questions, and just be respectful. And we are led by the technology, which in this case is Splunk. Okay, so over to you, Andrew.
Okay, so like I said, this is a bit last minute. I'm just going to pop the screen for...
Yeah, I mean, ingest actions is basically the same stuff you can do in your props and transforms, but it allows you to do it via the UI now. So just you don't have to dig in. Oh, have they not been hearing you? Did you get any thumbs up about people hearing us? Okay, good. That's fine.
Okay, sorry. I'm using OBS, and OBS didn't tell me that my mic was not on the scene until now. Okay, so just to go over Splunk 9.1. So 9.1 came out last night. I saw that there were release notes in on my morning sort of news trawl, and obviously I've been in work all day, so I haven't really had the opportunity to properly dig into the ins and outs of this release. It looks like it's like an improvement, so like an initial iteration, like Intel's TikTok clock sort of approach with their chips. So there's no big sort of new fancy thing like a dashboard studio from a couple of releases ago, or an ingest actions as a brand new product, but it looks like they're trying to improve the existing capabilities that are there. So I just went through the list, picked out some of the ones that looked interesting. So the first one, ingest actions. Ingest actions was obviously announced the last release. I've not personally used it, so my knowledge of this product is a bit flaky. But you can do live routing, filtering, masking of data. You can route specific data into your indexes, and then some into like an external storage like S3, for example. So in 9.1, some of the ingest improvements are to configure like S3 partitions. So I think that's file locations, I think, based on the timestamp and your source type name. You can route to, that's meant to be a free in that slide, but support routing to multiple S3 destinations, so it can now go to 8 different locations. The outputs have a bit more flexibility, so I've obviously not used it to send to S3 before, but extra options for compression, for batch sizes, for parts being sent at index time, and so on. I'll go on to the next slide because I honestly don't know a lot of all the information here. Rolling automated restarts for search head clusters are supported. So this is along the mantra that the approach that Splunk's trying to take recently, where they're trying to reduce the amount of manual intervention that an admin has to do in order to apply changes. So in this case, you could set this automated rolling to turn on, and it should just do it without you having to log in to a search head member and then activate a rolling restart. Another interesting one, which I didn't think about would be a problem until now, is search history tends to stick to the search head that you're on and not get replicated out. So now the Splunk's going to chuck it into KV store to replicate. There's also a new homepage. I think I first experienced this last week or this week on our work's Splunk Cloud instance. There's like this new homepage that I wasn't expecting. I think it just gives you a bit of customization rather than the page where it just asks you to set a custom dashboard. There's a much more options there now. And you could also test like set dark and light modes like on current Splunk Cloud versions. So I think there'd be a lot of fans of that. And then if you have to deal with TLS certificates, they're making a lot of them hot reload rather than again rolling restarts. It should just pick up on the changes on these specific instances of TLS certificates. I think there's a third slide. Yeah. And then there's a couple of changes to dashboards. So for classic dashboards, there's some warnings for using external content in simple XML. I think there's an actual menu where you can restrict external content, but you have to go into a menu and restrict it. But this is just like a modal warning to say, please avoid using external content. I'm not 100% sure what could be used for that. Surely some customers out there must do some wacky things with their dashboards.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. One that I wish I had a couple of months ago is the automating of adding the version number to dashboards to get them compliant with the new jQuery version. And in this version, Splunk actually default comes with jQuery 3.5. It's somewhere in the release notes, so that's there to it's there to prevent you from using outdated jQuery libraries. And normally, like, you wouldn't expect your end users, if they're managing dashboards, to be aware of this change. So Splunk doing it automatically would be great. Some improvements to Dashboard Studio as well. So you can export the data results from any visualization to a CSV file. So if you have a nice sort of graphic and your manager wants to see the information behind it, just click export. The base and chain behavior of a search. So in dashboards, you can have a base search to provide a lot of data, and then a bunch of chain searches off the back of that to take the initial results and then do all sorts of other searches on that. I didn't realize that if you change the chain search in your dashboard, it would rerun the base search again. So apparently it now doesn't do that. There's a bunch of performance increases, and you can do a lot more chain searches. It's up to 10 rather than 2. I think that means it's 2 in a row, but I think I've not used Studio that much. It's a relatively new platform, even though I did do a talk about this maybe like 2-3 years ago on the user group. It's just never get around to actually using it. And then inputs in Canvas. So instead of being stuck in the top bar, you can now just move them wherever you want on the pixel perfect grid. You got ChloroPreth map layers. So if you have your map visualization, you can now have the layers colored for your data. And there's now a UI to configure like axis charts for like bar graphs, things like that. Apparently, the only way to do it in the past was to just update it in the massive pile of JSON in the source code. So having a UI is probably a lot better for people who don't really know how to deal with the that source code, because it's
complex.
It is quite a thing to look at. Yeah.
I'm happy at the inputs as well, because like I was going to use, I built an app for this talk that I did, and I was going to use Dashboard Studio, but then when you couldn't put the inputs inside the actual elements themselves, I had to go back to using the old dashboard. It's a bit frustrating.
So there are a bunch of other changes. Oh,
there was a fourth slide.
There was a fourth slide. Okay. Federated search, again, something that I've not particularly used much, but this is Splunk's way of delegating. I think it used to be data fabric search, and now it's just federating a user on a remote Splunk instance, be it an on-prem or a cloud version. Or I think with this you can do like S3 in theory, so searching S3 for data. So there's a bunch of new remote data set types. So your metrics index and last job, which is the last thing that ran as the federated search user, is a data set, so you can now search against it. I need to read into what that actually means. The more configuration for disabling or deactivating providers and indexes, and the mode of that the federated search is running on. Search controls are a bit better, so you can pause and finalize and cancel a search a lot easier in like this. Then just like odd things like having wildcards as your index. Like no one really wants to do index equals star, but you can do it now as a federated search, and general improvements such as using accelerated data models, pre-stats, or doing summarizations in the background in transparent mode. Two more things, because I know this is my last slide.
Definitely.
So license master redundancy. So last major release with 9, they made the cluster manager HR, so high availability disaster recoverable, by essentially making one the primary and another a standby. So they've done that with the license manager now. So you can stick 2 behind a load balancer as long as you've got an unlimited license, I believe. Again, there's a lot more information on the release notes. And the final thing is there's warning messages to remind users that stats version 1 is deprecated. I don't actually know what this means. There's a version 2 of stats. I actually don't know what that means. I need to hunt down documentation for the next user group. I'll certainly have a lot more information on this. But do you know what version 2 stats is?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't know if it's anything to do with SPL2, but that's not really come into main Splunk for a bit. But I would expect something maybe to come out at conf as well. Obviously, if 9.1's just dropped 2 weeks before, they're either going to just talk heavily about this, or there's something else that's going to come out. But who knows? Like last year, there really wasn't that many new announcements. They just dropped 9 in there. A couple of slides on the screen, quickly go past it, and no one ever talked about it again. So yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. So I think the comp that I went to, they released the 8485 or something along those lines. Like the day before conf. It's like,
yeah,
I woke up in the hotel room and then I downloaded it. It was like just to mess about.
Yeah.
But then I don't particularly remember what was announced in that one.
The main one I remember about last year was announcing 9 and then instantly releasing that huge security bug with the deployment server. That's what I remember. That was quite funny. Cool. Thanks for that, Andrew.
So if anybody has any questions or notes or anything like that, just feel free to chat about that. But for now, I'm gonna mute myself and let Tom pretty much do a dry run of his talk.
As long as you don't mute me, that's okay.
Yeah, it should be fine. I'll see your audio bar. So
my audio, good.
Go green.
Excellent. Cool. Thanks, Andrew. So yeah, hi everyone. Welcome. So yeah, I am privileged enough to talk at Conf again this year. I've talked there before. 2 years ago, I did an actual talk on risk-based response, and then last year I was just on a panel at the Global Partner Summit, which happens at the same time, an expert panel. So this year is my first one in person where I'll be talking on the stage, and the topic is SOARing Effciently, identifying efficiency opportunities from your SOAR data. So this is me. We've already gone through that, so we won't hang too long. However, I have 2 passions in life. Well, 2 top passions, I guess you could say. And as well as security automation, it is also sword fighting. So here's me in my single sword and my long sword prize plays, which is like a ranking thing that we have to do. So I'm now classed as a scholar in both weapons, and I've been privileged enough to be made an officer of the club as well. So I am actually the sergeant at arms, maintaining discipline at the Hotspur School of Defence here in Newcastle, England. Why am I talking about weapons, you might ask? Well, SOAR is technically a weapon in your cyber arsenal, right? The definition of a weapon is just something you use to defend against or defeat another. Obviously, there are many variations to that definition, but I found the one that works for me, which is kind of unambiguous about the thing you're actually using as a weapon. But SOAR is a powerful instrument in the fight against cyber breaches, right? And again, you can use it both offensively and defensively, because let's be fair, the attackers are also starting to use, or have been using, automation for a very long time. But the problem with something like SOAR is, like any weapon, if you're not trained in it and the techniques are bad and you're inefficient in it, then it's going to be dangerous and you're not really going to use it very well. And SOAR is an expensive thing. Now, I've got here the Prague Ordinance of 1597, which basically depicts how fencers should act when inside of a fencing club. And it says, every single fencer is obliged to start the duel according to the tradition, unlike a peasant who runs insanely for a weapon, grabs it and wants to beat with it like a witless ox. So why is that relevant again? So whenever anyone looks to buy a SOAR platform, Splunk SOAR included, it's this big weapon, right, that they see. And the first thing they want to do with it is phishing. Let's tackle phishing. But phishing is the biggest and hardest use case, generally, in my opinion, to implement in SOAR, because there's so many variations, right? So this is what a lot of customers do, and obviously, hopefully, maybe this will teach them to not just start beating with it like a witless ox, and start with the basics first, right? So these two pictures here define that kind of journey in a very simple way. So the first one is called the Maya Square, and it teaches you how to cut in 4 different things, 4 different ways effectively, right? But each cut can also be countered with a cut from the opposing side. So if you think about this as like your initial battle with an attacker, they might send a hash through, you might find it to be bad, you'll block it, they change something, you block it, and you just kind of end up on this kind of like constant sort of battle, if you like, just kind of knocking each other, knocking in swords basically. But on the right we have an example of a master strike. Now this one's called the Zornhau, which is the strike of wrath, and it's basically hidden behind a normal attack, but then using that and using their response to your attack, you can then take the offense and basically win the fight at this point. So I do have a couple of videos. I don't know how well they're going to be able to be seen on YouTube, etc. So this first one is just me and the biggest dude in our club doing this basic dance of, like I say, just 4 cuts in the same way, but each one can be counteracted with a sword, a throw in the weapon in the same direction. But now here, and I actually skip a bit forward because I realize it's actually better to see it from this way. Here we have it where it's the same thing. So I go in with a normal cut, but then this time I'm forcing them to forcing them to make a move, and then I'm actually going around the outside. So that initial cut is pulled short on purpose to give me the center, and then I thrust to threaten them, and then when they react to that, that's when I go in for the kill, right? So that's basically the Zornhau, one of my favorites, but it's also a master cut, and it's relevant to this because, like I say, whenever we do anything, we should always hide it behind something that they expect, and then at the last minute change it so that they didn't expect it, and then we get the best results and hopefully end the fight. That's enough self-glorification about swords for now, but I hope you can see why I talked about it and brought it to the forefront. Not only is it a bit more engaging than most initial starts to talks, but also there is comparisons in the way that we would or have done battle over hundreds of years, and how that now translates to the cyber landscape, or cyber battlefield, if you want to call it that as well. But now let's get into the brass tacks. So inefficiencies in SOAR generally created by 6 usual suspects, right? So users can cause bottlenecks on the platform by, for example, having multiple tabs open. We all do it. I'm one of the worst people for it. Each tab will have connections to that database, even though they will eventually time out. Bad user behavior can put extra pressure on the system. Also, things like, using bad REST calls, which is what I've got at the end there, it's the same thing, both users and developers, because you can obviously hit it through the browser or you can use REST in playbooks, but badly formed ones bringing back huge amounts of data, taking a long time to search, again, is going to cause inefficiency in your platform. And when you've got things running at, machine speed, you need everything to be well oiled. Also, monolithic or single-use playbooks. Obviously, Splunk SOAR allows modularization, reusability wherever possible. But if you just have large monolithic playbooks that do just one thing, and then you've got multiple playbooks that could do the same thing in some ways, but you've just got these monolithic playbooks, then again, there's no you're not utilizing the system properly, and I'll talk about why in a minute. And they can cause a lot of additional load on the automation. Asset contention as well. So if you've got one poor little asset or that is doing loads called by every playbook at the same time, then eventually it's going to go, I can't do any more. And so again, you have to be aware of your use of the system and how many assets. And if you can you can't load balance them per se, but if you could spread it out, create multiple assets, then again, there are better efficiencies to be found in that. Or obviously you can up limits as well, but then that's a resource thing. And yeah, it's a catch-22 which way you go, whether you add more assets or whether you just increase the settings. Unreviewed and old content. So we all fall into that same trap, building something in SOAR, it works, let's just leave it to work forever, and that's it. And the problem is with that is that the platform changes so often nowadays that something that worked previously and seemed to not really complain about anything eventually could over time become really heavily inefficient, and you might not see it instantly because it'll still do its job, but it's definitely or most likely or potentially not doing it in the best way that it can. And use the platform, Luke. It's one of the biggest things I say in the community quite often, tongue in cheek, obviously. But custom code on the platform should be used at a minimum. I've seen lots of bad ways of using custom code on the platform, and we're all, if we're engineers, then generally we try and code our way out of a problem regularly. But luckily, I had a really good mentor that kept rapping my knuckles every time I did that and made me go read the docs and work it out and use the platform. So unnecessary custom code because of the way it's handled by playbooks by a specific daemon. If you have custom code that does a lot of stuff and you're going to use it a lot of times, move it into an app context because you're offloading that capability into a well existing robust framework which will already provide you better efficiency anyway. So where do you start? So really for all of this, for the data that you need to gather to understand, it's really the Splunk app for SOAR and externalization of the platform data. So the Splunk app for SOAR goes on your search heads, it goes on your indexers, but it can also go on the platform itself and it will retrieve all the platform related logs. So all your daemon logs, WSGI logs for all of your REST access and into platform access. But it also creates obviously all the props, transforms, and indexes you need on your Splunk side to then send the data or pull the data from the platform. Externalizing the data is a platform capability. So inside of Splunk SOAR, you can configure it to send some data via HEC, but it's not all the data, which is why these two together and another thing, which I'll talk about in a second, for me, made up the whole kind of thing that I'm trying to show here. And to be fair, I've barely touched the surface. I've focused quite heavily on playbook efficiency, but in this data, there is a raft and a treasure chest, put my teeth in, of information that you can get out to, again, look for efficiency ones. But the thing that made me think of this talk is that there's a new REST endpoint, which I will talk about in a second. So where does this data go? So as you can see, everything's done by the Splunk, everything from the OS. So everything that you put, if you put a universal forwarder on the Phantom or SOAR box, to pull the data, this is what it grabs. The only difference from normal data is the Nginx logs do actually get given the default or the normal source type for the Nginx app. So if you're already monitoring your Nginx access, for example, maybe it might be part of your authentication data model, then you can get your Splunk SOAR usage into there as well and start monitoring it as well. But as you can see, we get all the daemon logs, spawn log, which is to do with actions being spawned, for example. You get your database logs, also MISC logs. You might get cluster logs, things like that. I haven't included clustering on this because it's probably a whole different beast when it comes to efficiency and logging, etc. But MISC logs will probably be things like clustering logs, RabbitMQ logs, things like that that are used in the more advanced implementations of Splunk's architectures of Splunk SOAR. So the new REST endpoint, which is the main reason why I kind of thought of this talk, because I haven't seen a lot of people talking about it, and I tried to use it and found that it was usable, but I had to do some stuff. And again, the next slides will talk about that. So we're currently on version 6.1 or 6.02, I can't remember, of Splunk SOAR. But since 5.3.3, your playbooks have now had the ability to log their resource usage. So if you have any playbooks pre 5.3.3, you have to open them, edit them, and then it'll come up and say, hi, I've got some new code for you. Yes. And then you press yes, save it. And now every run since then will log these statistics and you'll be able to grab them. The REST endpoint itself is just playbook resource usage, but you have to provide it with a playbook ID at the end. It's not just like a one that will bring back a huge array of information. You do have to give it a playbook ID. When you give it a playbook ID, as you can see here, for every block in the playbook, obviously I've only taken one here because otherwise the JSON's quite large, it gets you the block name, and then it gets you all of these data points, if you like, from that block. So you've got things like, you know, how many bytes are in the request and the response, how many times did it attempt that, what was the latency, how many database queries did it make in that time, and was there any latency. So these are really rich and useful pieces of information that we're now going to be able to get from every single block, including the start and the finish blocks, because bear in mind, input playbooks now have 10 inputs, 10 outputs. So there is going to be database, you know, conversations going on there as well. And people do put code in those blocks sometimes as well. So you now get a full view of that playbook. Excuse me. Now, there are some pros and cons of this data. So the pros is it gives you a snapshot of the average usage. So for example, if you just put that REST URL and the playbook ID at the end, it gives you over all time the average for each of those data points. But you can also get statistics for single or multiple playbook runs. So if you want, for example, I want this playbook, but I only want this run ID, then you can do that and it will bring back just the stats for that particular run rather than averaging it out, even though the stat will still say average. It's not. It is actually the snapshot of that playbook. You can also add a list of playbook runs. So if you just say, I just want to average the stats out for these playbook runs of this playbook, you can add that in as well. And it will then average it and bring it back. But what's also really cool is you can do a time range as well. So if you specifically want to look at how a playbook behaved or was efficient in a specific time range, you can also now add that onto the REST call as well. So you can sort of get either a really big view, or you can get a really focused view, or a sort of a sample view of the data that this playbook resource usage API now provides. The problem with it, or the cons at the moment anyway, because bear in mind this is quite new and, you know, hasn't been updated for a bit, it's not logged anywhere. It is purely in REST. So it makes it hard to ingest it into other places. And I'll talk about how I did that myself. Additionally, as you saw before, I'll just flip back so you can see, there is no context in this data. It is just a JSON object with all of these data points in. At the top, I've got the REST call, but that's just because the way the browser returns it. But there's no playbook ID. There's no when was this playbook run. There's none of that associated data in the actual JSON object itself. So it does make it hard to just simply export it. You've got to do a little bit of tweaking in the middle. Now, luckily, I like automation, and I'd say I'm pretty good at it. So I actually used Splunk SOAR to make the data pretty enough that Splunk would just go, aha, I know what that is, and now I can do lots of cool stuff with it, right? So this is the process I followed. And again, I'm sure there are cleverer people out there, and I'll talk about another way that you might be able to get this data in, but my SPL is incredibly rusty, but my automation is not. So I used a playbook to get all of the run IDs in a given time frame. I would recommend personally once every 24 hours in the quiet time as well, because this will get a lot of data and fire a lot of data up to Splunk. And if you have it, the dashboard that I show you in a minute, it will always be the worst one because it's the one that takes the longest to run. Then I get the resource stats. So I go to that new REST endpoint, but I only pass in the playbook run ID, or the playbook and the playbook run ID, to get just that snapshot of that data. I then split each output by block name as well. So I'm now creating smaller chunks of data. I add further contextual data to it. So playbook ID, playbook run ID, and the start time being the main ones. And then I correlate it all and post it all up to Splunk, to an index in Splunk using the existing Splunk app on SOAR. So I'm not reinventing the wheel as in how to get things into Splunk, but I am just taking that data, chopping it up, adding a little bit of special sauce, and then throwing it up to Splunk to allow me to build my app and show off some of this stuff. So this is the playbook that I use to send the data up. As you can see, really the main bit is this code block where all I do is I go and I work out the last 24 hours or a day ago. I get everything since then. And then I add I get it and break it up and then add these playbook IDs, playbook run ID, start time, and then the block name and everything else is all of the stats that are basically inside of that response. And then I get them all together in this format block, and then I use the Splunk app on SOAR to post everything back up to Splunk so that I can actually use the data nicely in Splunk. So there are some other ways that I talked about, right? So obviously everything's in REST in SOAR, which is awesome. There is an unknown soldier that has been around for a little while. That every time I mention it, people are like, "Oh, why haven't I heard about this?" So there is the Splunk app for SOAR now comes with an inbuilt capability, to reach to your SOAR box and retrieve REST data and suspend it like in air, if you like. It doesn't log it anywhere unless you tell it to. So you can just hit it and it'll bring back the JSON, although it is raw JSON, which can be a bit hard to read if you're bringing back a big array of information. But this is why you've then got the existing collect command as well. So you can take that data and then log it into a summary index and then do some stuff with it. So again, I'm sure cleverer people can probably use this to pull in the data I've just done and add some context to it, but I know automation more than I do SPL. And so that's why I kind of went with the way that I did it. And it works, which is the main thing. But I realized for large customers that data push and up to Splunk could be quite a big one if you've got a lot of playbooks running. So this might be a better way to do it. Additional use cases for this REST SOAR command is things like building asset and identity lookups to enrich some of that data coming in. You can poll Splunk SOAR REST to bring basically anything on demand, right? Or via scheduled searches as well. So if you've got, user and asset lookups, you could run a scheduled search to the REST endpoint for the users on the platform every hour and keep that populated. But basically the main thing here is with REST SOAR, you can retrieve anything to monitor your efficiency, right? If you just need to quickly look at something, but you don't want to log onto the platform and do it via the browser, you can do it by Splunk. And then additionally, if you want to use that information, you can then use the collect command to store it. So lean mean automation machine. So there is some best practice that I've picked up from the community and from my days doing this stuff. So generally speaking, you want to have no more than 10 to 15 blocks per playbook. And this is also filters and decisions because they do database calls. They have to do some working out and comparisons. And if you're chucking a lot of data at it, you might find that your filter is not efficient. And also modularized playbooks. So we have the concept of playbook runners now, which is going to talk about in the next few slides. But modularize where possible. Everyone does, or every use case generally has an enrichment capability. So build enrichment playbooks that you can then just pull into other use cases as you need to build them. But also, if you keep them small and compartmentalized, then the efficiency is better because, again, when I talk about the runners, as you'll see, it'll be able to pick a bit of automation up, finish it, drop it, move on to the next one. And there's multiple runners which can provide great parallelization. Can't believe I said that first time without tripping over. Additionally, if you have playbooks where you're trying to prompt people to respond, like, is this bad? Do you want to block this? That kind of thing. And you want to bring them into the automation. And at the moment, you're waiting more than 15, 20 minutes for that response. Don't. Find another way, because all of that time that the platform is waiting for someone to respond to that automation, that playbook is suspended in memory, tapping its toes, going, come on, and waiting for someone to respond, which means it's taking system resource, which means daemons are going to be utilized. And also, if, for example, anything happens to the system while it's waiting, then it's lost and forgotten. And even if that person sees the ability to respond, and they do, it's not going to do anything because it's going to have killed that prompt because it's going to be hanging in memory. So there are ways of doing it. Happy to talk about it. But email, instant messaging, like there are ways to link into those in order to kind of get those prompts a little bit more efficient. And also, like I say, if you have to wait for a long time, don't. I have seen people configure this for days sometimes, which is not good. When you're making REST calls to the platform, make sure that you add as many filters as possible, especially time-based. So you can do easy filtering, like I want this label, I only want this thing to contain this thing. But another great way of making sure you only pull back the minimal amount of data is to use one of the time fields in order to say, only get since this or before this. Anything that takes a long time to complete or return huge amounts of data will make the platform perform negatively. If you can think you're running 1,000 playbooks an hour and each of those playbooks makes 10 REST calls and some of them bring back, tons of data, eventually something's going to fall over. And with this platform like SOAR, you don't want that to happen because it's generally an intrinsic part of your security operations. So we talked about runners before. Previously, Splunk SOAR was a serial runner. And basically it means that it would only be able to pick up one bit of automation, finish, pick up the next bit, and it would generally do it in sequence, right? So playbook 1, playbook 2, function 1, playbook 3 is how it would go. And obviously it could still be fast and you could add more resource to it and things might run a bit quicker, but there wasn't really great parallelization at the time. Although it did seem as though it was parallelized, it really wasn't. But now you have multiple runners. So in this instance, you can see, although we've got a similar time frame, I've been able to run like 3 times the amount of data and 3 times the amount of automation, and it kind of picks it up just as and when one goes. So if you've got 10 runners configured, those 10 runners will spawn and be there no matter what, even if they haven't got anything to do. But then as soon as something comes up, one will pick it up and run with it and drop it, which is why, again, this 10 to 15 blocks, keeping your playbooks running for like a minute or 2, maybe 5 at most, is essential. Because if these runners have any issues, if they drop or die or whatever the best word for them is, then again, you can have cascading failures, or your playbook might, not do the thing you need it to do, and then it'll carry on anyway, and if you have an error handled. So you can see instantly from these 2 slides how this took 13 minutes to run 4 bits of automation. This took 17 minutes to run 12 bits of automation. So, parallelization is key. But when we're talking about tuning opportunities, when you are adding multiple runners, you also need to be a little bit careful, because you can implement basically race conditions with some of this stuff, right? So if you're using things like save object, use save data where possible, because you can add more things to make it unique so that it doesn't get overwritten. If you have to use save object, then use all available parameters to make sure, again, that it is as unique across all playbook runs as possible, so that if you need the automation to retrieve that data, you can be almost pretty sure it's that bit of data, rather than potentially one overwritten by another runner that's ran the same playbook but for a different event at the same time. Use local variables instead of global ones. Again, just keep things localized, because anything global means that any runner can update it at any time. And if you need to grab that information, there's a high chance you'll get the wrong one. But also, with more runners now, your logs are going to be populated or filled a lot quicker. So they will rotate quicker and drop off the end quicker. So I would definitely recommend increasing your log rotate size so that you keep more logs for historical access if you need to. Otherwise, yeah, you might find nothing will happen. Your disk space won't fill up, but your log rotate will kick stuff off the end much quicker. So you should up that size in order to maintain the history of your runner activity. There is a code block execution timeout. So for any custom code inside of playbooks, if you have a bit of custom code, I think the default is 10 minutes at the moment. If anything takes more than 10 minutes to run, then the runner will just die at that limit, right? So it doesn't matter, even if it's right at the end and there's only got 2 seconds left of stuff to do, at that 10-minute thing, that runner gets cancelled and your playbook will, well, at least that particular bit will stop at that point, but it'll still try and carry on. So if that piece of code is intrinsic to something you're doing downstream, then you're going to have problems. So again, not only write efficient playbooks, write efficient code as well, and make sure that it's not likely to last more than 10 minutes. Or if you really have to, which I don't advise, you can up that timeout in minutes as well to allow you to run longer bits of code. But the longer something's running badly, then the longer you don't know it's running badly, and things can go bad. We talked about the runners as well before. So in the newer versions of Splunk SOAR, it's 4 by default, but the maximum is 10. And they do get created even without assignment. So if you put that number in, then that's how many spawn at continuously, or always present. If you find that your playbooks are queuing and you still have available CPU or memory resource on the platform, then kind of increase one at a time. Don't just go big bang, I'm just going to throw 10 at it, because you will also find that the gains will actually start to taper off eventually. I mean, that won't be the same for every customer and implementation, but eventually, past 5 runners, you will find that you won't have as much of a step up in efficiency as you would with maybe adding that first 1 or 2. But again, this is just kind of like an iterative approach, right? My playbooks are queuing. I should try and up it by 1. Am I still okay? Yes. Right. Let's carry on. Is it still queuing? And you can keep going around in that circle until you hit that sweet spot of runners and efficiency. Obviously, each implementation of SOAR is genuinely very different or very varied from my experience. So when you are making these changes, make sure they're iterative. And if you've got any concerns at all, speak to support first to just kind of get them to either hold your hand or at least advise other things that you might want to change to, get the best efficiency out of the platform. So how to rest best. I've talked about rest a lot, so I'm going to give some hints and tips. But it's a powerful capability. SOAR is basically REST, right? I mean, everything is done via REST. All of the underlying APIs basically use REST in order to do something. So if it's used improperly, again, it can cause slow performance. That great responsibility, great power comes great responsibility, right? You can do awesome things with SOAR REST, but you can also kill the system if you overuse it. So consider the endpoint relationship, right? So if you're going to an endpoint, remember it's a database table basically that you're accessing, right? And when we talk about containers and artifacts, if I wanted to go get a value or if I wanted to work out how many containers have this value in an artifact, then usually I'd go straight to the artifact endpoint and say, okay, how many of you have this value in? Because to me, that would be an easier REST call. But did you know it's actually quicker to get it through the container endpoint than it is through the artifact endpoint, even though artifacts are associated to containers? They're not actually on the container values, they actually are associated to it. So the answer to that might have been no or yes. I don't know. Depends how used to SOAR you are or REST in general. So what I have here is an example. So what I've done is I've got the same piece of information. I have 20,000 containers and I have 42,000 artifacts, right? Because that is always going to be the case. You don't generally have one container to one artifact. It's generally one container, multiple artifacts. In some cases, hundreds, and I have even seen 1,000+ artifacts, which is breaching limits and stuff, but it can be done. So think about, I'm going to hit a REST endpoint now, and this basically hits both REST endpoints, but this one uses an advanced feature to go through the container endpoint, but with filtering, jump down to the artifact table and find anything that has only the source address of the Google DNS IP address in this case. So you can see the numbers at the end do actually align with the numbers of the values. So I've got 20,000 containers, 42,000 artifacts, so 2 and a bit times. And you can see on the right hand side, it took 2 and a bit times as long to get that information. So when you're thinking about using REST calls on the platform, consider the number of elements inside of those database tables that you're getting. And if there is another way that you can sort of subvert or get through to that information through a smaller table, then that is obviously the recommendation. So here's some examples that I was talking about. So use multiple filters where possible, right? And like I say, filter on anything. You can only use one exclude statement, so it's better to be implicit than explicit, or whichever way that works. So use filters as much as you can. But if you do have to then say, actually, in this end data set, exclude this, then do it. But if you use more than one exclude, only the last one will actually apply. So it's a bug, and I don't think they've ever fixed it. I have raised it, but we'll see. Also, this is the time filtering I was talking about. So almost every log on the platform has some sort of time, start time, close time, update time, something time. So again, in order to only pull back a small set of information or the most useful bits of information, I guess, always try and do a timestamp comparison. Now, you can use the greater than, less than, greater than equal to, or less than or equal to statements. And basically less than is anything up to. So if I say less than this timestamp, then it's anything up to that timestamp, and then greater than is anything since that timestamp. Because if you think about it, timestamps are just the number of seconds since January 1st, 1970 made pretty for us to understand. So really it's just one big number, and that's why you do greater than or less than. Also, you've got things like the double underscore in to use in a list. So instead of doing like filter custom field substate equals false positives and then an additional filter custom field substate equals no action required, I can actually say I want this field if it's got any of these values in a list. So again, it's a much more efficient REST search because it's not it's not working out and comparing each filter. It's just got one filter with multiple parameters. Quite powerful, that one. But also double underscores are pretty cool as well, because as you can see here, right, I want to go to the custom fields element inside this JSON, but that also has a JSON element with keys and values in. So in order to get to this substate value, I have to go double underscore and then the key, and then I do the double underscore for the filter operator. So there's multiple ways to do or to use the double underscores. And also, as you would see on the previous slide, I also use the double underscores to go from the container object to its associated artifacts as well. So again, realize it's highly advanced. This is not that well documented, but it is documented on the Splunk SOAR documents when it talks about querying REST data, etc. But it's definitely like a kick the tires and give it a go and play with it. But hopefully some of this will kind of resonate with people who are already possibly doing REST stuff with SOAR, because it is the one that will bring the system down if used really badly. So keep your house clean. So there are obviously things like retention. Data retention models or strategies now, because obviously the size of the database, and as I said before, the associated table you're trying to query can generally grow really large if left unchecked. Things like playbook run, action run. Just imagine if you're running 1,000 playbooks that have 10 actions in per day, your action run database table is going to be absolutely humongous. So you can now apply database retention strategies in order to keep certain things a bit more trimmed, but just be careful, because anything that does get trimmed gets deleted, right? So either back up before you do it, or make sure you do it on some of the things and not the things that you're going to be audited on, like the containers, for example. But all these database retention strategies will help you make sure your system is clean, lean, and able to automate at speed as well, especially with REST capabilities. So this is a video of the app that I've built. I think it's just a few minutes long, but I'll talk over it, which is what the idea at conf is, just because, demo gods are not usually very nice, especially if I'm trying to connect to a instance I have in Dharma from the stage at conf. I was just like, I'm not even risking it, so I'll just run a video and talk over the top. So I created an app inside Splunk, and I went with the kind of ES look, where it's like kind of you get all the information at the top level and then you can drill down from there. So what we have here is the initial dashboard, or the top view of SOAR efficiency, and along the top there I've got obviously all of the data points that we talked about, but that's for all playbooks. So each of those data points might be a different playbook at this point, because it's the worst in that particular category, if you like. But you can then drop it down to a specific playbook ID, and you can say, actually, I just want all of these data points for just this playbook ID. Bear in mind, it will still be an average of all the runs as well. I can do it over time. So I can see which one's been the worst over the last 7 days, or which one's been the worst, just today, for example. And then I actually can drill down from that as well into one that will give me a lot more information. So what playbook was it in? What was the block called? What was the playbook run ID? And actually get the actual numbers on the right-hand side, so I can see, not only what's the worst one, but I can get an idea of what, the top 10 or top 20 are as well. Obviously, if you want to change the search underneath, then you can do that too. But REST is the main thing I've been talking about, right? But also I've got the HTTP bytes, so I've actually put those into one dashboard, because they're pretty much the same thing, just in and out. So again, I'm trying to do that kind of top level dashboard, and then you get the drill downs to provide you with a lot more information. As you can see here, I did actually leave the playbook that used the data to transfer up in the search, which I thought I had got out. So that one there, that's like 150 million HTTP bytes out. Yeah, that was me sending this playbook data up to Splunk in order to build these dashboards for you and show you in my talk. So I'm pretty sure it goes back now, but so yeah, mass artifact creation. So again, anything that's going to take a long time is going to create a lot of information, send it out, and that's what's going to populate that dashboard. But the REST one is, it's going to show you all of the REST calls. It uses a WSGI log, but you can now filter it by things like the endpoint, the response time, or the count, or the total bytes. So it depends what efficiency element you're looking to kind of work out how bad your REST calls are, because not all REST calls that look bad are bad. It's just the best way it can be done. But in this way, it allows you to really now start filtering out, okay, which REST calls are called a lot, which ones are the ones that take the most response time, or which ones provide the most bytes either in or out as well. But also you can now filter on just the endpoint as well. So I just want to see all the calls to a container endpoint and how good or bad they were, and further filter on as well. So I'm hoping that this app, at least will give people ideas or the ability to look at how good or bad REST calls are. In the future, I'd like to add things like exclusions. So like, oh, that REST call is fine. Like, I know that's the best it can be. But obviously, again, my SPL and the time limit was not on my side. But also, one of the biggest things is you can check for things like, have they put filters in? Is there a time thing, a time filter in there as well? Obviously, if there isn't, then that's not good. But that's why I now go back to all to show you where there are ones with filtered time. And as you can see at the end, it actually tells you who the user is that ran it, whether it was the system ran it or whether it was the browser as well. So you can start to see now whether your users are using REST well or not, or whether your automation is using REST well or not as well. And then I also go into some best practice. So you should always rename your blocks, right? Don't leave them as just underscore whatever at the end. So this just looks for any block names in playbooks that are left as the default. So you can kind of keep an eye on the development as well. Make sure that people are following best practice and not just leaving block names as standard. And then also I've got a couple of extra panels underneath just to show, the methods used and the HTTP response codes, just because I wanted to beef out the initial dashboard a little bit more. But that's basically everything from my talk. I do have another slide afterwards that points you to a GitLab with the app, but I haven't uploaded it there yet because I'm still working on it for conf. Obviously, to make it a bit better than it is there. But yeah, that'll be my additional slide at conf, and then obviously I do open for a 10 to 15 minutes Q&A session as well. So thank you everyone for listening. If you do have any questions, and I'll wait for the time delay, then please ask them in the chat to Andrew now, and I will be happy to answer them.
We actually do have two already. I was just waiting until an appropriate time. So both from Care, I believe that's how we pronounce your name. Sorry if I messed that up. So question one is to do with the 10-minute run out. So do we have an option if the 10-minute run out that the playbook can wait for a certain amount of time and then try to rerun the code again?
No, it is just you set the code timeout at a global level, and you can't. I mean, you could potentially add that into the code itself, if you know the limit and like you are monitoring the time. But then I guess the thing to that would be, if it's already taken more than 10 minutes, you wouldn't want to run it again. Otherwise, you're just going to be in like an infinite loop potential, which is definitely bad, and that definitely would bring down the system. Thanks for the question, okay.
Second one again from Kurt. Can you add a description for each playbook ID to help understand the reason why it might take the most time to response, for example?
Ooh, I mean, there is a playbook. There is information attached to the playbook in a different index as in the description. So potentially, yeah, you could pull that into the app. Just so again, this all depends on whether you're implementing best practice and actually adding descriptions to your playbooks. I mean, there isn't anything I can do in the app to sort of say this is why it's big, because obviously you'd have to do a lot of understanding of the actual playbook code and what it's trying to do to kind of come up with a reason. But a way that I might be able to do that is if they've made a proper description on the playbook to say this is what it does, this is what it's expected to do, and maybe pull that in or be able to navigate to that from the app, then yeah, they might be able to trawl through that and understand. But bear in mind, these drill downs can also go to webhooks and stuff or URLs. So potentially one of the other things you would do is you would click on it and it would take you to that playbook on the actual platform, so you could actually look into it yourself. But obviously not everyone is going to have necessarily the user access to SOAR to see the actual playbook in situ, which is why I haven't added it to the app just yet. I hope that answered your question.
And we've got two from Peter now. The one just literally popped up now. The first one complimenting the app and dashboard, but have you done or considered a view for comparing versions of the same playbook and if code changes have made things better or worse?
Oh, that's a really cool idea. So you could do that. Although the problem that you have is that the playbook ID will also increment at every code change as well. So you'd have to maybe link them together using like the playbook name or something. Yes, it's doable. That is an awesome thing to try and do. I don't have time to do it before conf now, which I'm really gutted at. But that's actually a really good idea. I think you could. You just have to find how you would link them together because, like I say, every time you make a code change, the playbook ID would iterate up, and it wouldn't just go to the next one because if you've made a bunch of changes previously as well, it'll jump to the next available one. But you could use something like the playbook name to then start comparing things. Absolutely, yeah, that's actually a really good idea. Thank you.
And the second one from Peter, along the lines of like Ready Player One, are you managing to find many more REST API Easter eggs? Seems like there are a few hidden REST functionalities, filters, etc., that the community are slowly unearthing.
Not at the moment, to be honest. There is a few that I found a little while ago when doing case management for customers, like things like the case container map, for example, is a really good REST endpoint. So if you want to see all of the containers that are attached to a case, so you know how you can merge events into cases. There is a REST endpoint that isn't documented that gives you that map that tells you what containers are attached to it and stuff like that. That I found probably about 2 years ago now. So whether it's still there or not, because I was told at the time when I asked someone in support, and they said, yeah, you can use it, but it might change. So nothing at the moment. But I will also put my hands up and say, at the moment, like my hands on at SOAR is relatively limited because I am now in a new role as one of the engineering leads at Dharma. So not as much kind of at the coalface work, but I do still dip my fingers in and kick the tires, and if I see stuff in the community, then I do definitely tinker. So not at the moment, but you know there are other community guys and Splunk Trust guys who definitely do, like Mike MHIKE. He's got a great sort of REST cheat sheet that is definitely somewhere in the Slack community multiple times because I push it out as much as possible as well. So, but no, if you find any as well, please do either get them added to the docs or at least inform the community. That would be really good. Thank you.
We don't have any more questions. I'll give it another couple of seconds. While we wait, I was wondering, since you've been looking into REST and all these sort of endpoints and metrics, what's the most desirable thing that you would like requested in like the next release that would help you out with these sort of checks and things like that?
I would personally, as I think I made allude to earlier in my talk, I personally think that playbook resource usage endpoint is awesome. Potentially. So if they added it to the heck output and added some context to it, for example, then personally I think that is something that customers would be able to use, within a few days and start to really see not only efficiency, but I think, as it was Peter said, you could start looking at how better is this playbook now I've made this change, or how worse is it. The reason I split it into playbook run IDs as well is obviously every time a playbook runs, it doesn't always get the same amount of data, right? Sometimes it'll have 2 artifacts, sometimes it'll have 100. So that's also why I split it out. But that, like I say, that has really piqued my interest about the comparing playbooks in their updates, because in one of the log data, it does have the previous versions as an array in the playbook data. I can't remember where it is. So yeah, you could potentially say, do joins or some crazy SPL that I don't really know to pull out all of the information for those particular playbook IDs as well. And then, yeah, you could get some sort of trend or something. That's really piqued my interest, that has. Thank you, Peter. But yeah, that's what I would do. So thanks for the question, Andrew. I would get that playbook resource usage information as clear, concise, contextualized, and able to be easily ingested into a SIEM, Splunk particularly, but any SIEM really. So that would be my ask.
All right. So we've got no more questions. Yeah, no more.
Great. So thanks very much. That's really good. Those questions are awesome.
Let's move on to any other business, which is any actual other questions or discussion points that you want to raise. I know last time we had a session, we were going to do like a ChatGPT talk, but I think I'd need to have a bit of time to actually read into it rather than.
That's gonna be a complex one, but cool one, but complex. Yeah.
Got a comment from Peter saying the playbook endpoint has all the previous versions. Used it to compare Python between versions, but not on 5.3.3 yet, so can't use for performance.
Ah, boo. Yeah, 5.3.2 and 5.3.3 are probably one of the more stable versions at the moment. So, but yeah, no, definitely. Once you get in there, I'm on the community, so please feel free to hit me up. Or, you've seen the talk, and I will be releasing the app after conf as well. So.
And general question for anyone on the chat: anyone using mission control? Now, I know it's being bandied about, so I'm not personally using mission control.
The white rhino that is mission control. Yes, so we're lucky enough to have it on our partner SaaS stack. We've got everything actually, which is really cool. Even Edge processor, which I've had a little play with, which is good fun.
Like the little box thing that you stick on like a server or something like that.
Yeah, it's a Docker image, I think, that you stick on a server and then point your forwarders at it, and then it's basically DSP. If anyone can remember when we were talking about data stream processor, it's obviously the answer to Cribble. But the good thing is it's free to cloud customers, the Edge processor capability. So, but it does only send to Splunk and S3. But anyway, that's a whole nother talk. What was the question again? Sorry,
mission control.
Yes, mission control. Yeah, so it's still in its infancy, but it is now an app. It's only available in cloud at the moment. It is. You do have to have ES. You do also, if you don't already have SOAR SaaS, you do get given a community version SOAR SaaS because Mission Control will pull in your notables by default, but if you want to have any other events in Mission Control, you have to use the SOAR capability to ingest those, and create those events, like ingest emails or all the other things. So I haven't seen a lot of it at the moment. I haven't really kicked the tires of it, but it is Splunk's approach to case management and single pane of glass for security event management, which, let's be fair, we've been hunting for a long time and still haven't got there. So I will be surprised. And if they haven't made the case management functionality a lot better than it is currently on Splunk SOAR, then yeah, I'm not too hopeful. But yes, I have seen a lot of information about it. There are APIs to Mission Control that you can use with SOAR in order to create things, update things and stuff. But I personally haven't done too much tire kicking myself, but I have done a lot of reading up on it. But good question.
I was trying to think of what I was going to say outside of the ChatGPT. Oh, yeah. Stats. Remember when I mentioned stats earlier about being deprecated? I had a little Google, and I think the majority of people should be using version 2 right now. I think version 1 is when you just use a word as the function rather than the function in brackets. So count.
Right.
Yeah, so count works. That's like a default. I don't think that's going to change. But if you were to do average or sparkline, I think that's where it is being deprecated from what I can tell. I don't think it's SPL2 because SPL2 isn't in 9.1.
No, it's in Edge processor, and I think it's in a couple of other of the new things, but I don't think it's in the main platform yet and won't be for a while.
Yeah.
Which like CQL, SQL, E, Program E. It's actually pretty cool. Some of the demos I've seen for SPL2, if you like programmatic languages, it can actually be pretty powerful.
Yeah, I had I thought it was going to be a 9, so we upgraded to 9, and then it was like, why is SPL2 not working? Oh, it's not in here.
They're still thinking of another name for it, Andrew. They still haven't landed on SPL. Like they still haven't. It's not going to be called SPL2. It's going to be called something else. Yeah. But yeah, I think they're still canvassing for names for it. So.
Right.
Cool.
So yeah. So the next session's probably got to be a .conf discussion. Should make it sooner.
Showing off all my swag.
Yeah. So, problem with doing it next month is Tom will be exhausted from Vegas, and then Edinburgh in August is a bit of a nightmare with the Fringe. So, we're going to have a think about when to this, because I do want to get back to in-person sessions. It's just we really need the numbers, and I think the majority of people who are actually watching right now, based on the check-ins, are not actually anywhere near the city. So
But thanks for joining. You don't have
yeah.
to move to Edinburgh, but thanks for joining.
Yeah, we're grateful for you joining. I think some of them probably deserve a shout out because there's other user groups going on fairly soon. I think the Yorkshire User Group said that they were doing a session
next week.
So the London's got one next week. Yorkshire's.
Right.
I need to search on LinkedIn. Just give me a second. Because all the UK-based groups are now trying to coordinate a bit better. So 6th of July, that is next week, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a week today, isn't it? Or at least a week next Friday or something, is it? I don't know.
Maybe. And then the London Splunk group are doing it on the 5th of July. So 5th and 6th. So nice. you've got 2 days straight of Splunk user groups next week. One, the London one, talking about the Splunk attack range and threat research team. Cool. Yeah, and the other one, the Yorkshire one, I think has Tom West, who has done a session here before. I don't know what his presentation is. I don't know.
It'll be good though.
Yeah,
I bet.
Because he did one about automation last time for us, how he's automated his house and ingesting all the data, but I don't know what the topic is for the Yorkshire one yet. I think Niall did check in for this event, so if he's in chat, feel free to advertise. But with that, we do have the user group website. People who are here probably are aware of it already, probably checked in through it. But if you want to share it with any of your colleagues, especially people who actually live in Scotland and want to come in person, feel free to send them the top link. We have a LinkedIn group. It's a closed group. We'll try to accept your registration. I think we've had a couple of spammers recently, so we tried to.
Yeah, we've got to be a bit careful. Yeah, we're getting a lot of job spammers. Yeah.
There's the community Slack group, which is fairly active. Admittedly, I don't use it as much anymore, but that's because I don't have 2 devices on me at the same time anymore. Because I used to have so I worked at Adama, so I had a Adama laptop with Slack open all the time while on Lloyd's, but it's popping off still. we do have a channel. It's not really that used. It's /hashtag Edinburgh on there. Feel free to add to it. We'll post when the user groups are meant to be happening in there as well. Finally, if you want to present and share at the user group, because we're constantly on the hunt for speakers, feel free to reach out to either myself or Tom. Make it obvious that it's for the user group. We don't really want unsolicited anything. I don't think anyone from the user group is sending solicited stuff, but that is one of my personal emails, so I'd rather not have anything like that. And with that, thank you for joining today.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah. Enjoy the rest of your week, and hope to see some of you at conf. If not, see you afterwards.
Yeah, right. And with that, I'll end the stream. Goodbye, everyone.